Good afternoon and welcome to the Xerox PARC Forum. This is an open forum and it will be videotaped. My name is David White and I'm from the Xerox PARC Document Hardware Lab. I will be hosting our forums just for today and next week. After that, Palo will be our forum coordinator. The theme for my forums has been Science at the Edge of Science Fiction. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to mention that at next week's forum, February 15th, Mr. Chip Walter, an author and future trends consultant, will be our speaker. He will probably be the speaker that gets closest to my theme when he presents his topic, Boldly Going, to find fantastic connections between science and science fiction. Today's speaker is Dr. Chris Duffield. Dr. Duffield is a visiting scholar at Stanford University's Material Science and Engineering Department. He's the director of the Virtual Information Lab and web host of IPTQ.org. By the way, IPT stands for Insulin Potential Therapy. He'll probably fill you in on what that means. He'll also follow my forum theme, Science at the Edge of Science Fiction. Since he'll discuss the topic, the VID, or the Virtual Information Domain, is the computer. Discovering the Virtual Information Domain, Transcending Moore's Law, and Vidic Technologies Beyond Imagination. In biological, physical, and psychological domains, there are many anomalous phenomena. Dr. Duffield will show that this could be explained by an information infrastructure in the vacuum, separate from, but interacting with matter and energy. He has named this the Virtual Information Domain, or the VID. In discussing this topic, he will briefly address information physics, a selection of observed anomalies, Vidic technology and business possibilities, and a research agenda. Please join me in welcoming our honored speaker, Dr. Chris Duffield. Such a wonderful topic, Science at the Edge of Science Fiction, and also to PARC for having this forum. I'm a regular, I come just about every week. PARC, of course, is a wonderful place. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, thanks to, now I can hear myself. Yeah. Thanks to Dave White and to PARC, and I have a lot to say. I'll take questions afterwards, and so let's get moving. First, I'll give a little ad, like he said, for IPTQ.org, my website. Insulin potentiation therapy is a better, safer, faster, cheaper way to deliver medicine. It actually uses insulin to create hypoglycemia, which somehow delivers drugs better and makes them work in about 1/10 of the normal dose. It works really great for cancer and many other diseases. It's been ignored for 75 years, sadly, tragically, although it would be legal and ethical for any doctor to practice it today. No FDA approval needed. So anyway, this is my big project. I put that website together, and there you go. Welcome to visit. Mahatma Gandhi said this: first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Well, in science and technology, it's a little bit different. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they say, well, we already knew that. So, is there anyone here who already knew it and is here just to see if I get it right? One, okay. Yep, okay. Any visitors from the future? No, they can't reveal themselves. Okay, so this is my prescience or pre-science track record. In 1956, when I was a little kid, I noticed that continents seemed to fit together. South America and Africa And then by the time I got into college, plate tectonics was happening. In 1971, at the first National Conference on New Worlds, which I just stumbled into in Carbondale, Illinois, when I was chasing Buckminster Fuller, I gave this wild-eyed talk at the end where I said, "Happy birthday to the world brain." Well, in the 1990s, of course, we had the World Wide Web showing up. In 1972 through 76, I did work on what I call technoecology, which is looking at industrial systems by analogy to biological systems. And it's sort of like the body of our physical world, our society. And in 1992, there was a book called Bionomics that got published. And more recently, there was, Bill Gates is talking about the digital nervous system and so forth. So it's like maybe 20 years ahead. By 1982, I came up with this invention for shoes that had rounded heels on them. And although someone patented that about 10 years later, and I didn't do anything with it, no one else has either. So hopefully in the next 2 years, that'll come out. And then in 1995, I came up with this idea for virtual information and submitted an abstract to the Consciousness Conference #2 in Tucson. And it got accepted, and I showed up and did a poster there. And who knows when this is really going to come, but I wanted to get it on the record. And today is actually the first time that I've given a talk about this to anyone, except my friends. So why this talk? This idea has haunted me since 1995, and everywhere I go, I feel sort of like I'm, in the 1880s or something like that. It's like the computer technology is so cute. It's really fun. It really does great stuff, but oh, what's coming? So I got tired of just being in that state and thought I'd just plant some seeds here, and maybe we can speed up evolution. Maybe this can happen in the next few years rather than waiting for 20. It'd be fun to find people to work with, and also, like I said, I want to get this in the record. So this is being videotaped, and in the future, people will be watching this. Okay, here's the outline. I'll talk about the Vidic hypothesis. It's Vid, not VID. It is spelled VID, but I just capitalize it because I think it's important. Maybe people later, they'll make it smaller or something. And then the second part, I'll talk about anomalies and explanations. Anomalies, things that we know in our physical world that just don't make sense unless you buy into a hypothesis, something like this. And then in part 3, I'll have fun talking about what we can see in the future, possibly if the vid is real and if this really comes to pass. And then finally, conclusions. Okay, the Vidic hypothesis, it's a different perspective. X-Files, they say the truth is out there. What I say is that the truth is in here. It's like it's inside our reality. It's not outside our reality. So I want to sing the glories of materialism first. In materialism, I define it, this is how I explain it, summarize it. Everything is matter and energy. Information is just configurations of matter and energy. And vacuum is nothing. Okay, that's what we all learned in school. Materialism is great. Materialism rules. Materialism is a great triumph in science, technology, business, the whole world around us. I just had a tour with Dave of the facilities and here at Xerox. The projects they're working on, fantastic. There's this fabulous history, and you watch Moore's Law, and things are getting smaller, faster, cheaper, better. One of my favorite places is the Computer History Museum over in Mountain View. Wonderful place where you can go from, where each bit goes from being a tube this big to, or several tubes actually on a circuit board that big, down to where you have millions of gates on a single chip, that size. But materialism is limited. There are all these unexplained anomalies, which I'll talk about later. There's limits of space, time, matter, energy, and physical laws. Even Moore's Law has limits. People don't know exactly when the end will come, according to our current paradigm. But that we're going to run down to where you only have a few atoms per gate, and then what do you do? And there also in the material world, there's limitation of appreciation and fulfillment. There's wealth unfairness.
people get blind to the fact that there might be something besides the material world. And we have war. And so the material world, to me, I mean, it's endlessly fascinating, but by itself, it's ultimately boring and empty. I mean, talk to billionaires. You know, they have everything, but you know, sometimes they feel like they have nothing. So I think going beyond materialism looks better. We can incorporate it. It's great for what it is, but I think there's more. First of all, it explains many anomalies. Second, it seems to open new sciences and technologies, just huge vistas, and new possibilities for fulfillment and appreciation, even of the material world, and a bigger understanding of who and what we are as human beings. We have such a limited view of what we are. And I think that it's going to lead to us all having enough wealth, like Buckminster Fuller used to say, for all human beings to live like kings, only happy. So here's the Vidic hypothesis. Number one, that there is more than just matter and energy. Number two, that information can exist separate from matter and energy, which I figured out later, oh, that means the vacuum. And it can interact with them. And number three, the vacuum, instead of being nothing, is almost everything. So here are the new words. There's virtual information domain, the vid, Vidic, having to do with the vid. Virtual information is information that exists separate from matter and energy. The domain is where it hangs out, wherever that is. Vidic is the study of the vid, and Vidic systems. And then another word I just came up with is smart vacuum. I mean, there are people who work with smart materials, they work with smart bombs. This is smart vacuum. And then also a new notation. We have, I borrowed these from physics. They use it for magnetic fields, where the field line goes into the paper, that's the X, and where it comes out of the paper, that's the little dot. And so that's into the vid and out of the vid. So the vid, wherever it is, we push stuff into it, and they take stuff out of it. And then, so I came up with a new logo, which is, well, you can call it a vid port or a vid link or whatever, that combines the two in a infinity sign. So the vid really is not totally new. I mean, it's an ancient idea. Plato used to talk about the world of pure forms. In the Middle Ages, they used to argue about, and you've probably learned this, about the number of angels that could stand on the head of a pin. More recently, David Bohm talked about the implicate order. He's a physicist. Rupert Sheldrake, a biologist in England, has talked about morphic fields. He thinks that the universe has memory, and he calls it something like morphic fields, where the universe stores memory, and he applies this to physical systems everywhere from cells or molecules up to planets and galaxies. But he thinks that the mechanism he talks about is resonance, that physical systems resonate with these fields. In sci-fi, science fiction, they talk about, well, the Force and the Matrix, and there are many, many other examples. I think the word vid, virtual information domain, is a better word for this, because it's more comprehensive, and it implies not just memory, not just resonance, but a whole host of different complex phenomena and systems that are existing in the vacuum. And this leaves room for science and technology to move forward. So the physics of the vid. Claude Shannon talked about information. He's probably the best standard theory about information. He developed information theory and applied it to thermodynamics. In quantum physics, they talked about quantum non-locality, the observer, virtual particles, and quantum flux in the vacuum. I mean, things get really weird in the quantum world. So why not virtual information in the quantum world? Jacques Sarfati is an eccentric physicist up in San Francisco. Anyone here know him? He has big websites and email lists and everything. He's quite something. And he talks about qubits and post-quantum physics. And William Tiller, who's my sponsor, emeritus professor at Stanford, he talks about he talks about multiple dimensions, but there's an inverse space, which is like a Fourier transform of this space. And he comes up with lots of examples that seem to support that. There are lots of physicists who talk about multiple dimensions. There are physicists who talk about string theory. I could see virtual information existing in those domains too. I mean, just recently they talk about, they developed some data about muons, and it destroys the standard model of physics. So really, anything could happen in physics, anything. But I'm not a good theoretical physicist, and so I leave this to other people. I'm just working on the bigger picture. Here's the way I like to visualize the vid. Here's the world that we focus on, the material system in the matter and energy world. And if you zoom in on it, it's fantastic. There are all kinds of details, and I mean, it's fascinating. But what I'm saying is that there's this Vidic world, and in it are Vidic correlates to the physical systems, and I think it's much bigger. For instance, I mean, there are many more relations between atoms than there are atoms. And then I suppose that there's the possibility of systems that exist separate from matter and energy and are actually engulfed in the vid, wherever it is. Another way to visualize the vid, this is an intuitive way, but in comics they talk about, we have these thought balloons, and I think it's a really great model for what our inner process is, because we have the vid inside us too. I think, proposing that in a way it's almost like having a desktop. And Bernard Bards, who I saw at the consciousness conference, he talks about a sort of a conscious workspace, and it looks a lot like this desktop that I'm working on, icons and windows, and in a way that's sort of what it's like to be a human being. You can change topics, change subjects, you can call up different routines. I mean, it's interesting. So here's some properties of the vid and Vidic systems that I'm inferring from the different anomalies and some hunches. It's vaster than the material world. Remember the Vidic iceberg. The material world is just the top of the iceberg. It interacts with matter and energy. It may actually underlie and create matter or the material world. I think it's the substrate for thought, logic, consciousness, and experience. I think it's the substrate for a lot of biological information. It's highly flexibly structured and organized. It's self-organizing, hierarchical, and complex system. People would really love this. It's unlimited by space and time. It's everywhere and every when. It's unlimited by matter and energy. It's unlimited by size. Again, the angel's on the head of the pen. I mean, maybe there's some limit down, where the dimensions interact, but I don't know. For all intents and purposes, size doesn't make any difference. There's unlimited storage of information, bandwidth, computation capacity, and networking. These are inferences. I can't prove it, but I suspect it. One thing that there's a lot of evidence for is that it's programmable, whatever it is, by conscious intent. That it speaks your language, and that's friendly. So Sun Microsystems says that the network is the computer. I say the vid is the computer. It's intelligent, it's everywhere and every when, it's capable, conscious, friendly, and it's weighted. So let's get into some of the anomalies and explanations. And I'm really going to rush through this because there are a lot of them. These are the unsolved mysteries. And we go in genomics. This is in the New York Times on Tuesday, in the Science Times. A short, junky surprise. This is the human genome. It's very short. There are only 31,000 genes. And and they're expecting that those 31,000 genes are going to explain our bodies, how they work, our physiology, our biochemistry, our behavior, our instincts, our psyche. I don't think so. So I think the Vidic hypothesis could actually take us a leap further. I think I'm just proposing that most of the biological information is actually on the vid. Remember the iceberg. We're looking at the genome here, but the Vidic genome is much vaster, much more complex, much more developed. So most genes actually are just templates for the protein factories in the body. The junk DNA, I think that's the interesting place to work. I think those may be antennas or they may be pointers into a big Vidic database, wherever it is. It's everywhere. evolution, actually, I think, I've always looked at it, it looks to me like there are just too many variables evolving over too short a period of time to get us, to get birds, to get whatever. Perhaps the vid is actually a database, or there's some actual mechanisms going on there. I don't know, I'm waving my hands. Embryo development. No one really knows yet where the blueprint is for the embryo. And yet they develop, different species, human beings. How is it controlled? Well, there are some biomechanical and biochemical, molecular biological mechanisms, but I think that they may not be the whole story. Perhaps we'll find answers in the vid. In molecular biology, I think this is well known that the ligands and receptors bind much faster than would be predicted by Brownian motion. Shall we look in the vid for that? I don't know. In brain and neuroscience, I used to work in a neuroscience lab at the University of Arizona. I used to talk about some of these ideas, and they didn't want to hear it. But no one knows. This is one of those things that they don't like to talk about very much. They don't know where memory is. They don't know where perception is. They don't know where consciousness is, and they don't know where experience is. I mean, they think that all we are is just machines that have neurons firing. And that's not how we live, and that's not how we experience. There's much more going on, I think. Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose talk about how microtubules may be acting as quantum transducers within the neurons. Maybe that's a possible, maybe it's not just going between neurons, but is also being a transducer into the vid. Now, an interesting piece of evidence also is that Carl Pribram, who used to be at Stanford, now is in Virginia, when he maps out the way that perceptions, visual, tactile, etc., are mapped on the cortex, it's not a simple map. It's actually a hologram. It's actually a Fourier transform of like the map you would expect to be. So this might fit in with Professor Tiller's idea of the inverse universe, that maybe the information is in that, in the inverse space. Okay, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. We haven't found them yet. It's mysterious. Why not? Well, maybe they haven't pointed at the right star, or maybe electromagnetic communication becomes obsolete rather quickly in the history of the civilization. Maybe almost everyone else is using the vid, using Vidic technology for communication. So here's the book, William Tiller, my advisor. It's called Science and Human Transformation, Subtle Energies, Intentionality, and Consciousness. He has many different anomalies in here that he talks about, and he's done many experiments, and these are things that cannot be explained by the standard paradigm. He also, in the book, develops the physics framework, and he talks about the inverse space that I was talking about earlier. So here's some photographs that I scanned out from his book. This is just one example of an anomaly. These two pictures were taken by two cameras mounted on a metal bar, and they were taken simultaneously. And sorry, it didn't scan very well, but it's an auditorium like this, so you can see the people and hear the lights and stuff. But in this camera, which was imprinted by the intention from this guy who has this ability to do that, you see streaks coming out of the lights. I mean, these were mounted on the same bar. You see all sorts of other weird things in the photograph in the original. Here's some more photos that he took. These were taken in Memorial Church at Stanford, and you can see the stained glass windows. But what you don't see is that both of these pictures, according to Professor Tiller, were taken through the lens cap. So what a complex process that is. Is it light that's going through, or is it that intentionality sets up some sort of mapping that creates a geometry and then somehow triggers those little film grains to put? Tiller is still working, and he's been focusing lately on intention imprinted devices. He takes a little electronic box and he focuses intention in this in a special way, and he's found that this can actually change the pH of water. It can change the temperature of air. He's done some experiments with fruit flies and also with liver enzymes, and they all work. He sees changes according to the intention that's imprinted in the device, and he sees more effects as the lab space is actually worked in. over a longer period of time. Another thing he's noticed is that there's an oscillation both in time and in space, sort of like the Fourier transform that we were talking about earlier. If you take a simple system and look at it in the Fourier transform, it turns into waves, and vice versa. There was a scientist named Marcel Vogel who used to work at IBM and used to live in San Jose. He had what he called the Psychic Research Laboratory after he retired, so he could do what he really wanted to do. He was working on imprinting thought forms into crystals, quartz crystals, and programming these crystals so that they would actually do things in the physical world, like changing pH, changing chemistry, and changing the taste of wine. He was doing experiments like that. There's a place called the Boundary Institute, also here in Silicon Valley. I mean, this is a hotbed of materialism, but it's a hotbed of all this other stuff, too. Dean Radin, who I don't know if he's still the president of the Parapsychology Institute, but that's his URL. He talks about how conscious intent, well, he's done experiments showing that conscious intent can actually modify random number generators, even in the past, even in the future. And he has some experiments that you can run right on the website. It's fascinating. I've played around with it. And, sometimes I score high, sometimes I score low. He's also done some experiments, and these are very well documented, where he hooks people up to biological monitors and shows them pictures on a screen of different things. And he finds that the body actually responds a third of a second before the randomly chosen picture of a venomous snake about to pounce or something scary shows up on the screen. So the body actually knows before something happens that it's going to happen. And there's the PAIR lab it's the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab in Princeton. This has been there for a long time. Robert John, they also have been doing the random number generator experiments, and they have some experiments on the web, so you can practice your psychokinesis. He also has found that these things work better in conditioned space, where someone has done rituals or they have focused a lot of intent in there for a long period of time. So it's very similar to what Taylor was talking about. There's quite a bit of research going on about remote healing and prayer. Elizabeth Card, who's up in, I think, in the Berkeley area, has been showing, remarkable results and very significant statistically. That people actually, by intention, can help someone get better, even if they don't know the person's name, if they're just chosen randomly, and even if they don't know where that person is. Remote viewing, there's been a lot of experiments in the Bay Area, I think even starting back in the 70s, on this. At SRI, the CIA has done this, and I know there's been some military experiments, where they take volunteers, they blindfold them, and ask them to see certain things, to go certain places or times, and to report what they see. And there are actually very good correlations. You can practice that on the Boundary Institute site also. Uri Geller, I've seen some of the results of what he did. He would be handed an envelope that would have a picture inside it, and he couldn't see the picture. It was sealed, and he would draw what he thought was in there. And I've seen the pictures are almost identical in many cases. I also talked with someone here at the forum about last week. I don't know if he's here today, but he was telling me that he knew someone who went driving with Uri Geller, and Uri had a blindfold on. So, I mean, these are wild things. Okay, then there's the DNA phantom experiment. My friend Vladimir Poponin, who lives in San Francisco, is a physicist. He's in the Russian Academy of Sciences. He did this experiment in Russia and also duplicated it at Stanford, where he's shown a laser, some sort of laser interference spectrometer. And he got to see what it was just going through air. And then he stuck a sample of DNA in solution inside there. And then he removed the DNA. And the air was different, or the space was different. Anyway, the spectrum was different. And this effect persisted for months. Cleve Baxter, who I've met, he's in San Diego. He started doing plant electrophysiology back in the 80s, because he teaches people how to use lie detectors. So he hooked it up to a plant, and he found the plant responded to his emotions. It responded to emotional events in people's lives, even to his thoughts. If he thought about hurting the plant, the plant would react. And he also went on, this is personal communication, he's done this with yogurt, he's done it with human cells, and he's even done it with water. Jacques Ben-Veniste, he is known for his controversial talk about homeopathy and ultra dilutions in nature a few years back. But these days, he's digitally recording some sort of information signature of drugs and then storing them digitally on a computer. This is through a sound card. And then playing them back through some sort of transducer into water, and that water takes on the properties of that drug or that substance and will actually have a biological effect. Then there's David Resnick, he's at ResTech, which is a company in Mountain View. And he's done some experiments where he thinks that he's shown that hydrogen gas is carrying information. A similar kind of experiment where it will affect cells or different reactions. And homeopathy, that's been around for, I think, at least 200 years. This is a standard way of making, imprinting substances, or imprinting information into substances. That's my interpretation, where you take a substance, dilute it, shake it, dilute it, shake it, dilute it, shake it, dilute it, shake it. And you can dilute it until there's not a molecule left of that substance, but it will have an effect. Now, it turns out that the effect is the opposite of what the substance originally would do. But, there are many, many doctors, especially in Europe, who do this, and there are many in the U.S. as well. Now, what most people don't realize is that you can actually take a box that's imprinted with intention to produce this information in a substance, and that will work too. Okay, dowsing and muscle testing. We're taught that the body is this amazing machine, but it's dumb. I mean, that's at the medical school. That's the way they teach it. That all we know is what we know from tests and from asking the patient questions and what we observe. But the body is really actually very intelligent. I've seen this many, many times, where you can do muscle testing and you can get information from the body. I did some muscle testing with a friend of mine. I knew I was developing some food allergies, and we went down the list of food allergies. And my muscle was strong, weak, strong, weak. Strong meaning that I guess it's good for me. Weak meaning that I'm allergic to it. And by golly, we came up with a list, and it made sense. Well, I went to and this is without me looking at the list. In fact, I've seen this done just with the name of the substance on a piece of paper crumpled up and blindly held against your chest. So I actually my grandmother took pity on me and sent me to an allergist, and the allergist did these pinprick tests for $350 or something, and by golly, it was the same list. So anyway, I'd like to demonstrate a very simple way to dowse or do muscle testing yourself, so that you can have your own personal window into the vid and do your own experiments. What you do is you take your thumb and ring finger, hold them together, and then try to break that apart. Now, if the muscles are weak, your finger will go through. If they're strong, it will be hard for it to go through. And you need to approach it in sort of an open, kind of humble way. So you don't know, you're clearing your mind, so it's not preconceived. And then you go, okay, I'm thinking of tobacco. Is it good for me? No. I'm thinking of whole wheat bread. Is it good for me? Yes. Okay. Well, each of those is a bit of information. Now, you can start practicing with your own body. Then you can start practicing with someone else's body, even if they're not there, or your dog. And then you can start asking questions. Well, what about something on the other side of the world, or something on another planet? And if you just think about it, if you took enough of these bits, you could assemble an image, for instance. It's digital. Or maybe it's an illusion. I don't know. But I use it all the time. Okay, radionics. This is a way to take a box that might even look like a computer. It can have knobs and dials. It can have a little PC built in. It's a device for gathering Vidic information and for delivering it. Intention is very important. I mean, you have to say what it is you want to know and what it is you want it to do. And you can say that by turning knobs. I mean, there are many, many different kinds of these things. You can read up on radionics. But it can also be automated. One of the ways of getting information is to use a rub plate, where you rub your fingers back and forth, and when it sticks, it feels like it sticks. That's the answer, whatever the knob is, is pointing at. The basics of radionics, and it's the same as for divination systems like the I Ching. So you have a physical system, you decide in advance what the language of that system is going to be, or you ask it what the language is going to be. And then, with your intention, you ask a question or you ask it to do something. And the universe seems to respond. Then there are my friends Gary Schwartz and Linda Rosa. They're at the University of Arizona. They have what they call the Human Bioenergy Fields Laboratory. They have found that if you have two people and they're even 20 feet, 40 feet apart, you can actually, and if they're close to each other, they have sympathy between each other. They're in love or whatever. You can find the heartbeat of one person in the brain waves of the other person if you do signal averaging. It's there. These days, they're going even more off the deep end. They're communicating with disembodied beings through mediums. And, I don't know. I've stayed away from that. But, we all have our limits. That's something I don't want to mess with. But another experiment that Gary did was he found that there was a significant difference between. He took people who didn't know any Hebrew, and he showed them 3-letter combinations, some that were real Hebrew and others that were just make-up words, 3-letter words. And in the people who knew no Hebrew, there was actually a discernible difference, highly statistically significant, between the response to one or the other, which indicates that, maybe there is sort of a memory in the universe, and that an ancient language may have built up sort of an information kind of field. Okay, now we get into behavior. There are instincts. I don't know if you've ever seen dogs of a certain breed. They'll always do the same thing in the same situation. Where does that come from? And there's intelligence of ants, termites, bees, bird flocks, fish schools. I mean, yes, there's some mechanistic explanations for those, but I don't think they go far enough. Now, if you really want to have a direct experience, just go to a stop sign, or if there's a storm and the stoplights aren't working. Notice how there's almost like a telepathic link between the people, so the cars get through. And then if you really want to see something really miraculous and totally unexplainable by physical laws, go to India and watch traffic there. It's outrageous. It's just unbelievable. And then also in mob dynamics, there's sort of a consciousness that happens. I mean, you've probably been there. Football games. Okay, more in psychology, and I'm just going to zip through this. That there are shamanic visions where shaman, they gather information, they influence things, they empower intent, they relate with animals, all just by going within themselves. There are near-death experiences that people talk about. I think thought, consciousness, intention, intuition, creativity, that these are all Vidic phenomena. The experience we have in bonding and sympathy and empathy, I mean, you have that experience of sort of knowing what that person you're really close with, what they're thinking. I mean, I'm sure everyone's had experiences like that, where you both call each other at the same time, or that sort of coincidence. More charisma. I think that's a Vidic phenomenon, maybe. But there's some people, they just walk into the room, and you may not even be looking there, but the room changes. There's telepathy. This is a real quick story. My sister called up my mother and said, "Mom, I'm not coming for dinner tonight." And my mother said, "That's okay. I know you're running off to Las Vegas to get married. Go have a nice time." And she didn't know. That happened to me too once. I just looked at this woman and said, "You went to Smith, didn't you?" And she did. So, and then there's clairaudience, there's psychokinesis, like the random number generators. And, people have done all sorts of other things. I don't know if spoon bending applies. Music and art appreciation. I mean, when you're listening to music and appreciating it, don't you sort of go off into another sort of space? I don't think that's all just neurons firing. In fact, there are these people who come up with inventions simultaneously. I've done this, other people have done it. Usually I come up with it about 10 years before the other people. I find that my own inner experiences, I go into like an inner laboratory, and the stuff is already there, it's built, and I just build it. And then there are all these stories about identical twins separated by birth. separated at birth, who years later they discover each other and they're wearing the same color clothes, same style, they're married to a woman with the same name, they have the same kind of job, you know, all these wild things. They're the idios savants, or idios savants, who you can ask them a complicated mathematical equation, you know, what is pi? And they'll give it to you hundreds of decimal places. Where does that come from? I think they're tapping into something else besides neurons firing. Multiple personality disorders, where each personality has totally different physiology, totally different personality. There's love bonding, there's hypnosis, cultural memes, linguistics and language learning. I think there's a Vidic component to that as well. You know, I'll bet you could do an experiment, and it would be easier to learn a known language than a synthetic language that had similar structure. Jungian archetypes and the collective unconscious, where does that come from? You know, why do we all, when we dream, have the same archetypes show up? You know, it's probably not from all reading the same myths or the same stories. And then synchronicity, the way things just sort of happen, coincidences, and more. Okay, now we get into the fun part, the Vidic technologies beyond imagination. This is just an idea that maybe a lot of the things we have will look just like what we already have. But there'll be a little difference. There'll be this vid port built in. So it would be this computer, and it wouldn't have no network connection, but it would be able to tune into the whole world. By putting your hand on, maybe that would be a way for it to tune into you and say, oh, okay, yeah, now you want this. Okay, now you want that. And it'll respond to your intention. So information technology, I think that our computers and the internet are only crude prototypes of what the Vidic information technology would look like, and maybe will. Unlimited bandwidth, memory, computing power, networking. Cyberspace just got a lot bigger and friendlier. I can see that in a Madison Avenue ad. There's an intention-driven interface. It would be truly ubiquitous, like Mark Weiser, who used to be here at Xerox PARC, was dealing with ubiquitous computing. This would be truly ubiquitous. It would have true artificial intelligence. And there would be a new software paradigm where software is self-organizing, it's invisible, it's on request, and it's ubiquitous. So you just say, okay, I want a program that does this. You have the program that does that. You don't have to know what's under the hood. You don't need to know where it came from, where it is. It's just there. There could be, I mean, look, what's happening? That's how that, remember the photograph? Maybe that was the intention of the guy, that it's going to take a picture through the lens cap. It's not actually through the lens cap, but that an image will form as though it were through the lens cap. And it did. He didn't put in geometry or anything. He just put an intention. And then I think software programmers, they're going to have to become intuitive. It's going to be a whole different world where they're intuitive and they have special consciousness skills. They probably meditate. They're humble. It'll be a whole different kind of thing. You know, Java programming won't be necessary. I sort of feel that way because I'm not good as a programmer because, well, I have to learn it every day over again. I forget all the commands. And the user interface, I think, will be truly intuitive and visible, direct, and both outside us and inside us. The biology, I think, will get new insights at all levels, from molecular up to cells, to organisms, to ecosystems, and even Gaia, which is probably a Vidic kind of system. The universal panspermia, that's life spreading throughout the universe. We may find a new definition of life itself, where we're incorporating not just matter and energy as we do today, but also the Vidic side. Remember the iceberg. And maybe there's a different Vidic origin of life. Maybe life actually started in the vid and then somehow found molecules it could work with and encouraged them to get together and work up that way. I think we're going to find better interspecies communication and interspecies appreciation. It'll be a lot harder to go kill a dolphin, for instance. And then I talked about genomics, and I think it will go way beyond that. In medicine, I could see new Vidic technologies and devices for diagnosis, treatment, prevention, health assessment, improvement, and maintenance. I can see intention imprinting happening in drugs. I mean, it's already happening in homeopathy. Maybe drugs would work better, have fewer side effects if they were imprinted. And even just water. I know there's some people who imprint homeopathics into water, stabilize it with alcohol, and it works, they say. And we may have better, hospitals may be designed. I don't know if you've ever been in a hospital room that you just walk in, you feel horrible to be in that room. And I don't think it's just from the smells. I don't think it's just from the people around. But the architecture's wrong. If you build a hotel room or a hospital room right, it'll feel great to be in that room. In mental health, I think we're going to develop better models of consciousness and personality. There'll be faster and better healing of traumas, and we'll have tools for self-engineering our perception and our emotions. There'll be faster integration of multiple personalities. I mean, that's just one application. In education, I think we'll have a better understanding of what learning is. I think there's a lot of Vidic interchange that happens between teacher and student. I think there'll be technologies developed to enhance this process. And maybe we'll even have downloadable knowledge and experience databases, that, like sort of like the crystals in Superman. You had this crystal, and it carried all the knowledge of its home planet. And I mean, I have to throw in a little science fiction for you, Dave. And I think evolution, well, there'll be new ways of showing ethics to people. So it's not just a concept, but you're really getting it. You're getting the feeling of what it is to be a good person. In arts and entertainment, I mean, we already have paintings. I don't know if you've noticed the difference between a painting reproduction and a real painting. But if you go to a real painting, like one of Leonardo da Vinci's, just to be in the room with that painting, it has a whole different vibe, a whole different feeling. I think objects really are imprinted with something. And I think we're going to be able to take that principle and augment emotions and perceptions. Maybe have an emotion track in movies. I think you'll be able to augment charisma. So when the rock star comes out, I mean, he doesn't have to do anything. People will just be blown away. And then, you can have these augmented group experiences. I mean, sorry, I don't have that here today, but where, the whole group will just feel something good. And then maybe, I like brainstorm. Maybe we'll be able to actually directly record experience and play it back. In material science, I think we're going to be looking for new materials that act as Vidic transducers. I mean, there's some candidates. We'll find ones that are better for information and intention imprinting, storage, recovery, and new materials for making conditioned spaces, for making rooms that feel good. New material systems for remote sensors and actuators. So you can actually sort of create a robot and then communicate with it through the vid, and it'll do what you want it to do. In nanotechnology, I think as in the biological world, somehow those little molecules are communicating with the vid, if it exists. So it's at the nanoscale where all these sensors, actuators, and transducers are going to be. Right now, nanotechnology, they're dealing with this problem. You've got these little things, they can do stuff, but how are they going to think? How are we going to communicate with them? How are they going to figure out what to do next? How are they going to interact? Well, physics could possibly remove that limitation. If there's this infinite intelligence, size is no difference, no matter, it's everywhere, everywhen, intention-driven, maybe you'll be able to actually coordinate nanotechnology and bring fulfillment to that. Bring them, what they've been looking for. The proper control, but yet being benign and not getting out of control. I think it's like I was saying, you can sort of ask any question and get a yes or no answer, which may or may not be right. But you may actually be able to make some sensors that are only just purely Vidic, and they will go through the scan and scan anything in space and time, and then it'll show up on your computer or on your paper or whatever. And then actuation, I think I talked about that. It'd be like little nanotech devices that might be operating in bulk that you could communicate with, and they would do stuff. So another possibility is vacuum energy. I know there's a lot of people who talked about tapping energy out of the vacuum. getting it out of the 0 point. And so I think if information is somehow involved with that energy, there may be some way to use information or software in the vid to somehow tap into that, control it, and release it for proper use. In the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, I put this in the abstract. I think there may be a whole world, a whole like huge Vidic internet that's already operating. These other civilizations have tuned into, and they're just waiting for us to show up. Maybe true, I don't know. Or there are user groups, free downloads, intergalactic dating, and collaboration, and some of the users might not even have bodies. I mean, like my friends at the University of Arizona, they're sort of doing that right now already. So instead of SETI, maybe we could have TUVI, tuning into Vidic intelligence. Someone else will probably come up with a different word for that. Okay, key technologies. We really need to develop the transducers. These could be antennas, and actually brought some antennas that I've made that seem to have that work this way, but I can't prove it. And crystals, liquid crystals, coatings. You can have cell cultures with electrodes plugged in, biomolecules, maybe even plants that have electrodes plugged in. This is open for exploration. And then more work needs to be done on imprinting matter and energy and conditioning of spaces like temples or boxes that do intention things. Need to develop sort of the linguistics of intention. I mean, English is pretty good for that. Sanskrit, I think, may even be better. And then developing the Vidic sensors and transducers, and then working on the interface. Is it going to be on a PC? Is it going to be in your thoughts? I don't know. Okay, ethics. I have to throw this in. I think that privacy and security may already be built in. For instance, I mean, there seem to be some barriers between me being able to read your private, personal consciousness workspace. Although when people are in love, it's almost like they can read each other's workspace to a certain extent, certain areas, never the core. We need to protect those things and keep those boundaries. We need to ensure universal access and to avoid abuses of the data. And that may be built in also. And we will develop a new understanding of how wonderful each human being is, how everyone is a unique treasure with full access to the vid. And we'll develop new appreciation for other life forms, wherever they may be. And life is incredible. Also, I think that unethical actions in both the material and the Vidic worlds will be detectable, measurable, preventable, and correctable. That, for instance, before people do a building project, they do a environmental study, that sort of thing. Well, you can just say, is this good for the world? Yes, okay, do it. And no, and it can be much more sophisticated than that. But the universe will talk to you and let you know what you ought to do and what you ought not to do. Okay, the conclusions. Number one, materialism is great, but it's limited. Number two, the vid, if it is real, is greater and unlimited. Number three, there's a lot of evidence that, at least to me, seems to support the existence of the vid. Number four, immense benefits could come to the vid, I was just talking about these technologies. Number five, it's okay to think outside the materialism box. I think most human beings throughout history have thought this way. It's only recently that science has divorced itself from it, and that's been good. We've accomplished a lot, but now maybe it's time to open up a little bit more. Number six, I think we've been preparing for the vid for eons. Really, it's built into us to think this way, to act this way, to build these technologies. Number seven, what are we waiting for? So thank you, and thank you very much for listening. I've got a few minutes for questions. Yes.
My daddy was a minister, and when I was a kid, I got all kinds of stories about the marvelous things that all sorts of mysteries that showed that probably was a God, and all sorts of difficult things that God would solve. And I was very impressed by that until I started noticing how the science thing worked in high school. And I've come to believe that the science way is better. And its key thing is to make a prediction that's risky, that is something that actually could be tested and could show that it wasn't so for some idea. I don't see that you're, there's certainly some things in here that would be testable, but it reminds me too much of that religion stuff.
Okay, I understand, and I've come from that position too. You know, I have this scientific side, but also I have this side that, you know, is open to other possibilities. Now you'll find that the scientists, the really good scientists, are also open to other possibilities. They just test them. That's where ideas come from. Right, and I agree 100% with you that the scientific method needs to be used in this, and it is being used. A lot of these hypotheses, people are saying, well, hey, I wonder if we can change the effect of a random number generator. And they're doing experiment after experiment after experiment. And the statistics are coming out saying, well, it's not 100%, but it's really good. I mean, the chances of this not being real are, you know, 1 in a trillion or something like that. They have just incredible statistics. And that can be done with all these things. I love the scientific method, and I thank you for bringing that up. I think we really should do all this scientific. Science applies to a method and not the content. So I'm proposing some different content that we can apply science and technology and engineering to.
On some of these things where you believe there is an interaction with the material energetic world?
Well, I think the Boundary Institute people and the PARC lab people are already doing that, and Bill Teller is already doing that. And I mean, a lot of the experiments are already being done. Homeopathy, many double-blind studies have been done on that, and they all show that, yeah, that works too. Anyone else? Oh, back there. Yeah. Hi.
And it seems to me that people have been accessing this thing for a long time. I mean, you look at feng shui, the morphogenetic fields, the ancient art of divining. Can you just address how your approach kind of is more than just a repackaging of that?
The question is, people have been doing this kind of thing for a really long time, and is there anything I'm doing here that's new other than just repackaging it? That is a good question. I think one of the main things I'm doing here actually is repackaging it so that it's something that people can work with. It's more technology oriented. It's more, in other words, the idea of the bid, it's like virtual information. Okay, that's different than using spirit or God or soul. So in a way, I think I'm doing that. I'm not denying any of those words. I think those are real realities in people's lives, and they may be real realities in reality. But if there is this complex universe that you know, there's this small area that the universe will let us use as sort of a technology. The same way we get to use quantum mechanics or quantum physics to make LEDs work. So, thank you. Yes?
Yeah, it's possible to affect random number generators. I think those people that do that should, when they win the lottery 10 times in a row, they will get some attention.
Right, that's true. If you talk with Dean Radin at the Boundary Institute, I think he has stories of people who've done that and then they've retired quietly. Also, the question is, if people won the lottery again and again by influencing the randomness, this might get around. Well, in a lottery, of course, a lot of people are trying to influence it. You know, there are lots of people wishing me, and so maybe they cancel each other out. But in terms of guessing, you know, foreseeing what that would be, I think there have been some anecdotes of that happening. You know, it's well known that in Las Vegas, if you turn out to be too lucky, they get you out of the game very quickly. They see you out of the casino. So I don't know. That's going to be an interesting thing to see. I did.
trying to apply science to something like this and keeping your mind open, you say, well, at what point will I stop investigating because it doesn't seem to be panning out, or the statistics are not holding as strong as I would think. At some point you should give up or you should not. I don't know who makes the judgment call, but at some point you want to ask yourself, am I biased on this or not? And then on top of that, you probably have to wonder if you're even running the experiment properly. So there's a balancing game, and you could be giving up right at the point where you just need to tweak your experiment, but on the other point, you might be leading yourself into believing that something is there when it really isn't. So the science, you don't know if you're playing correct science at all.
That's always the problem. The question is, how do you know when you're going to stop and if it's good science or if you're just fooling yourself, essentially. And every scientist has to deal with that, whether they're investigating this stuff or they're looking at the behavior of monkeys. Ultimately, I think you need to design your experiment in advance and then stick with that design. And I think these people are doing that. And certainly they're in all, if you go to Dean Radin's lecture, he's looking at the parapsychology results of these random number things. And for him, the results just get more and more significant the more data he gets. So why stop? He's, it's actually pretty amazing. Yes?
What's stopping us from discovering more of this, and what do you think are the biggest roadblocks?